Alan Stein, welcome to the Victory Degree podcast.
Oh man, it's so great to be with you.
It is a true pleasure. I know, we were joking around, we were going kind of back and forth and trying to organize this. Lives get in the way. We have busy schedules and stuff always comes up. But I'm truly excited that you're finally here and then we get to talk about not only your own experience and some of the events and the journey that you've been on, but also some of the insights that you have from some of the athletes that you work with. You're a high performance coach, you're a mindset coach, and so I think you're going to have a lot of incredible insights for our audience today. So truly excited.
Me too, man. This is going to be a fun conversation, and I look forward to adding value and talking about whatever you'd like to talk about, man. I'm all yours.
Love it. So let's start just to kind of frame for the audience, for people who might not be familiar with who Alan Stein is and some of the work that you do. Let's go a little bit into your journey, kind of how you became what you are, and then what you do present day.
Sure. So, as far as the context of this conversation, it's most important for your listeners and viewers to know that basketball was my first love. It was my first identifiable passion, and I fell in love with the game at 5 years old, and here I am knocking on the door of 50 years of age, and basketball is still a massive passion and pillar of my life. And the reason I share that is, basketball's been the red thread that's tied everything together that I've ever done, really personally and professionally. And, I spent the first portion of my life as a very dedicated basketball player, was fortunate enough to play collegiately all the way up through Elon University down in North Carolina in the mid to late 90s. And while I was at Elon, I started to develop an equal love for the training side of the game, strength, conditioning, fitness, plyometrics, nutrition, mindset, really everything outside of the actual skills of the game. So when I graduated from college in the late 90s, I thought, what could be better than combining my original love of basketball with this newfound love of what we now call performance training. It was really just called strength and conditioning back then. So I decided I'd be a basketball strength and conditioning coach. And, I did that for really the next third of my life. And now in present day, the current iteration is I'm a corporate keynote speaker. So I speak primarily to businesses and at corporate events and functions. But everything I'm sharing is through the lens of a basketball diehard and a basketball player and coach. So I'm teaching folks in the corporate space how to utilize the same mindsets and rituals and routines that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. So that's kind of been the full circle journey. And one more, I guess, thread to throw on there, which is kind of a recent addition, is I just started playing basketball again after a 10-year layoff. I decided to treat myself for my upcoming 50th birthday, and I bought a ticket to the K Academy, which is a fantasy basketball camp down at Duke with Coach K, Hall of Fame coach, Coach K. It's for old men like me that still want to play the game. So I've been in some serious training for the last couple of months, trying to get myself back into game shape and knock the rust off of my skills so that when I go to the camp at the end of May, I'm feeling as good about my game as a 50-year-old can feel. So I'm back to being a basketball player. At least that's how I identify now.
Well, I imagine that first practice back after 10 years was probably a little rough.
To say the least. And, even a couple months in, my fitness, my basketball specific conditioning is getting better. I'm very fit and healthy for a 50-year-old, but I wasn't in basketball shape. So yeah, those first several weeks were pretty tough. A lot of soreness, especially in the Achilles and the ankles and the low back. But game's slowly starting to come back. It's really neat, doing, and again, I don't want to make it be over dramatic and sound like I'm 90 years old. I'm a young 50, and like I said, have maintained a decent level of fitness, but it's really neat approaching the game now at my age because I know so much more about the game from a cerebral standpoint, but I just simply can't do the things I was able to do in my 20s. Physically, it's hard to run as fast and jump as high. And, I was never what I would call an elite athlete, but certainly have above average athleticism, compared to the average person walking the street, but just how much that's changed, over the last several decades and how my approach to the game is different. But I will say this, it has brought back this childhood excitement, this childhood exuberance. Like when I think back to my childhood, almost every favorite memory I have involved the game of basketball. It was usually going to some camp or playing in some summer league game or something with my teammates before or after a game. And playing again has really brought back that excitement. I look forward to waking up really early in the morning to go play a couple times a week. And it's just brought back this childhood excitement. So while I may be 50 years of age, there's times now where I feel like I'm 15 again, and I love it.
I want to get back to your journey and kind of tie up some loose ends, but
Yes.
you said something that I think is especially important. And when you mentioned childhood excitement, and I've spoken to other, high performance coaches. We recently had Steve Magnus on the podcast. We had Alex
Love Steve.
Hutchinson. So real, pioneers in their fields, and they've written amazing books, fantastic people. And they always talk about this childhood excitement and find things that feel like play to you. What others may consider work for you might just be, fun, and it might feel like, your 15-year-old self again. And I feel like a lot of people maybe don't consciously think about, okay, what are certain things I do in my life that feel like play to me? But for those of us who do try and think of, things that feel like play and try to go towards maybe a career in that field, I at least sometimes feel like I can't necessarily always find that thing. Like podcasting for me is fun and it does feel like play, and for me it's a way to unwind almost. I love talking to people, love interacting. But for those who might not be on that path of trying to find stuff that feels like play, I guess first of all, why is it important that we try to pursue that goal at all? And then secondly, what would your advice be to people who are looking to go down that path?
Well, I'll actually share the advice that someone gave to me when I was in middle school that to this day I still consider the single best advice I've ever been given, which says a lot because I've had so many amazing people in my life pour into me, mentor me, share with me, coach me, and give me great advice. But I had a middle school coach tell me that the secret to everything it is that we're pursuing in life, the secret to high performance, the secret to productivity, the secret to happiness and fulfillment, the secret to really anything that we ultimately covet is finding your strength zone. And he said your strength zone is finding what it is that you really love to do, find what it is you're naturally pretty good at, and then find where those 2 points intersect. So find what you love, find what you're passionate about, find what you have some natural talent in and you're pretty good at, and then find where that line crisscrosses. And for me, as you guys have already heard, that's been the game of basketball. Now, that exact point of intersection has changed a few times in my life. Like I said, it started as a player. I just was in love with the game of basketball from the first time I had one in my hands, and I was fairly decent at it. Again, one of the things I find so interesting is anytime we make some type of comparison, the most important part of that is the reference point at which you use. If you compare me to NBA players, then I'm not a very good basketball player. If you compare me to the average person that ever picks up a basketball, I'm actually in the upper 1% because I played college basketball. So that reference point is important. So when I say something like I was fairly decent at it, that's because I tend to always compare myself to kind of that upper echelon. I compare myself to the best of whatever that is. And I usually fall towards the lower end of the best of whatever that percentage may be. So I'm not saying it to be self-deprecating. I was and am a very good basketball player by all, accounts and purposes. But so the first part of my life, that intersection was as a player. I was pretty good at it and I loved it. When it got to the point that I was no longer good enough to play basketball professionally after college, well, that point of intersection had to move. And that new point of intersection was being a basketball performance coach. Again, that was something I was really interested in, fascinated by, and really passionate about. And it was also something I was pretty good at. Both of my parents were elementary educators, so I've always been fairly good at the ability to communicate and articulate and to teach and to coach and to share my perspective and point of view. And because basketball and performance training was something I was really interested in, it was something I was pretty good at. So that was that point of intersection. Then when I started to reach burnout, and not love being in the gym 10 to 12 hours a day, wanted to do something different, that point of intersection shifted again to being a corporate keynote speaker. But it's still checking both of those essential boxes. You know, being a motivational speaker, if you will, is something I'm really passionate about and absolutely love doing. And because I've worked on my craft, it's something I'm pretty good at. So I've stayed true to that, even though the point of intersection has changed, the iteration has changed. I've stuck with that recipe. And for me, I'll continue to stick with it. You know, if I wake up 10 years from now and being a corporate keynote speaker no longer, you know, fills my cup, then I'll find something else to do. But I can promise you it will still have those two threads.
Yeah, I'm always curious because I think for most people, it's easy to probably point to something that they find exciting or fun. Like, for example, for me, like even with this podcast, it's like, okay, well, I remember when I was first starting the podcast, I almost kind of drew myself into a corner because I was like, well, I can only talk about these things and these are the only topics that I can do because, you know, other people are only doing these topics. So therefore, for me to stand out, I only have to do this. And you start overthinking stuff. And then I kind of sat down one day and I went back to basics and I was like, okay, well, what do I enjoy? I love sports. I always have. I love, you know, entrepreneurship, business, those types of topics. I love mindset. So it's like, all right, let me find people that, you know, satisfy one or all of those topics and bring them on the podcast. And that will be my podcast. And that's who I am. Like, that's uniquely me. So I think with a little bit of self-reflection, you know, or if you just, you know, studied what someone did all day, you could say, hey, you probably find this fun. If you watch sports all day, you're probably like sports, I'd venture to guess.
Yeah.
I think it's a little more difficult for people to understand what they're good at and what signals to look for that would point them to say, hey, you're good at this thing, because we don't always receive feedback from others. And that's certainly, I feel like, at the apex for finding out what, you know, kind of the first signal that we go towards to see if we're actually good at something. So like, from your experience, like how can people start to think about or, you know, try to identify things that they're good at?
Well, I'm so glad you went in that direction. That's a really good thread for us to pull on. And a few other thoughts. One, I really quickly just want to interject that if it's something that you're very passionate about, even if you're not very good at it, that can and should still be a hobby. That can and still should be something that you choose to invest your time in because it brings you enjoyment. You know, not everything we do in this world does the goal need to be world class at it, and or even the goal doesn't even need to be to monetize it and make a living doing it. Now, because all of us do for, you know, a good portion of our lives, at least in our 20s through 60s on average, need to find a job and have some type of employment, you know, it would be my recommendation that whatever it is you choose to do for a living satisfies that recipe for being in your strength zone. But same thing, it's okay if your goal is not to be the best in the world at something. Now, depending on what it is that you choose to do, many times the feedback is inherent. The market will decide. Like if you choose to pursue being a professional basketball player, well, then the basement of that is you have to at least be good enough to make one of the professional leagues where someone will pay you money to play the game of basketball. It doesn't matter how much you love the game. If you don't meet that minimum requirement, then you're not going to be able to be a professional basketball player. You can still play in some men's leagues and you can still play intramurals in college and you can still play pickup games at the YMCA. Like you can still play the game because you love it. And again, I highly encourage you to do that, but that's not going to be your vocation if you don't reach a certain level. So, but I think that's important for everyone to try to figure out and decide. And I also want to say that it doesn't have to be singular. It's not like each and every one of us were only put on the earth to do one thing. And if you happen to miss that train, you know, you're going to be screwed for the rest of your life. You know, I'll say there's a handful of things that I believe I'd be pretty good at if I chose to pursue them. And they are things that I think I would actually enjoy. Now, I'm a big believer, and you mentioned a term earlier about getting back to the basics and the fundamentals, and that's something I certainly believe. But for me, I also believe in having focus. You know, for me, I work best operating in a state of focus. I work best living my life based on a handful of core principles. You know, I have a very, very simple life. And I don't say that to diminish myself. I actually say that with a huge sense of pride. I only have a handful of things in my life that are really important to me. My children are very important to me. My health, my mental and physical wellness and well-being is very important. My work, my craft is very important to me, and my friends and family and relationships. But outside of those four things, I don't really dedicate very much bandwidth to anything. But I put all of my heart, soul, and love into those four things. But that's a choice. And I'm certainly not here to say that that's a choice everyone else should make. Some people might like to do a variety of different things, but for me, that operating system works best. So ultimately, that's what I think everyone needs to try and figure out is their operating system. What ways of operating give you the best chance to not only be productive and perform at a high level, but what way of living also gives you the most satisfaction, the most fulfillment, the most optimism? To me, the number one thing I'm concerned with is my quality of life. And I define my quality of life is how much time and energy can I devote to those four things that I just mentioned. How present and how much time and energy can I devote to my children, my family and friends, my vocation, which is professional speaking, and to my own, let's just call it self-care. My sleep, my working out, my nutrition, that stuff is really important to me. And it's stuff I really enjoy. I know a lot of people who think going to bed early and waking up to eat healthy food and waking up to work out is punishment to them. It actually brings me so much satisfaction. I love it. So for me, that's quality of life. And I've built a life that allows me to pour into those four things very regularly and consistently. And I don't do a whole lot outside of those four pillars.
I want to bring us to a topic, Alan, that is certainly, I don't think it should be controversial, but I feel like it's become controversial recently. And that's this idea of balance. And so the reason I bring it up is our last guest was Steve Magnus, and he recently put it. Steve's fantastic. I mean, if you're listening, and you haven't checked out his work, highly recommend. We'll drop his Twitter link in the description, and his books, just fantastic. But he has a new book called "Win the Inside Game." It's all about mental performance and mindset. And one of the ideas that he talks about is balance, and this idea that, especially in American culture, there's the idea of grinding and just going after your goals, bar none, and ignoring everything else, and just putting your head down and working. And certainly, if you log on to Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now, and if you go through some of the advice that you see on there, that is very much the advice. It's this, you are not an entrepreneur unless you're working 100 hours a week. You're not an entrepreneur, unless you have to ignore your family, your friends, and everything, just devote yourself to your work, right? A lot of people call it hustle porn. It's this idea that all you have to do is hustle. Anyhow, Steve talks about the idea of balance, and he says, well, if you want to do this for a long time, you do have to have some sort of balance. And we were laughing about, and as a basketball fan, you'd probably appreciate this, about the example of Nikola Jokic, right? Who was arguably the best basketball player in the NBA, multiple-time MVP. But he goes home to Serbia over the summer and races horses, and seemingly, at least from what we can tell, doesn't touch a basketball for 3 months, and then comes back and is dominating the NBA. And Steve talks about how, maybe we should learn something from that, and maybe it's good to take some time off and to re-energize and all that. So all of that to say, your idea, kind of your thoughts on those ideas and what your relationship with balance is.
I'm so fascinated by the English language, and I'm so fascinated by vernacular and different word choices. And every single word in the English language, which is the only language I speak, has an emotional connotation, as in you say the word and the word itself brings up some feelings and some emotions. And many times the same word can bring up different emotions amongst different people. So you and I may hear the same word, but we feel differently about it. And the reason I say that is, so the word balance has never worked well for me personally, because it connotates to me, I picture a triple beam scale, and it connotates that everything needs to be equal. And in my mind, the way I interpret that, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I've always interpreted that as, well, if I'm going to work 40 hours a week, and I say my kids are important, then I should also be with my kids 40 hours a week. And that was always a struggle for me. So for me, I think I understand the sentiment at which you and Steve are discussing, but I'm always looking for what I would call work-life harmony or work-life flow or work-life integration, which is basically saying, I want to make sure that I'm not just succeeding and tipping the scales in one area of my life, but I'm able to do that across the board to whatever it is that I deem important, and that I am able to unplug and untether and get away from certain things when I need a break, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or what have you. So yes, I'm a huge advocate of that. I do believe we only have so much bandwidth anyway, which is why I said I've chosen to limit my focus and attention and heart and soul into just those 4 pillars. If I started to add a 5th, 6th, and 7th, I'd be afraid I'd spread myself too thin. And so for me, that's what works best, and it will ebb and flow. To me, instead of trying to make sure that I'm always balanced among the time that I'm spending on each of those things, I recognize that those 4 things for me are going to constantly be in flux, and they're going to constantly ebb and flow. There are some months where my speaking calendar is more full and I'm traveling more and I'm busier, and I'm not able to see my kids or my friends or family as much those months. And then there's other months where the speaking calendar is much lighter and I'm not traveling, and I can double down and spend a lot more time with friends and family and my kids. There's some times where my schedule's so busy that I have to curtail the amount of time I spend on my self-care. Then there's other times where the schedule's wide open and I have more time to devote. So what I try and do is wherever I am, I try to be there. I try to be all in, be fully present, be fully engaged, and give whatever that thing or that person is my full attention and everything I've got. Because I found for me, the struggle with balance would be if I'm traveling a lot, but then I'm starting to feel guilty that I'm not seeing my kids. So while I'm traveling, I'm thinking about my kids and I'm feeling guilty and shameful. And then I'm not really doing anything at an elite level. So instead, and now that my kids are older, and for context for your listeners and viewers, I have twin sons that just turned 15. So they're freshmen in high school. And I have a daughter that will be 13 this summer. She's in 7th grade. So, they're teenage years. Obviously, this is still a very impressionable and crucial time for their father to be in their lives, to love them, to mentor them, to support them. So I very much believe in being a very present father. But I've also realized that the lifestyle and the vocation that I've chosen means there's going to be times when I'm away. There's going to be times where I'm in Orlando at a speaking engagement and I'm going to miss my son's JV basketball game. But that is a trade that I'm willing to make at present. It's a trade that I've had a conversation with my children about. So this is not something like I'm just deciding and just saying, yeah, this is what I do, deal with it. I've let them know that as their father, one of my biggest hopes for them is that they end up growing up to find something that they're just as passionate about as I am about my career and my speaking, and that it fills my bucket, and that I feel like I'm making a contribution and I'm adding value to people's lives, and I love what I do. And because I love what I do, and because what I love to do is kind of a non-conventional vocation, there has to be some sacrifices involved, which means I'm going to miss some things. And my kids understand that. And we've had that discussion, and it works for us. At the same time, my kids know that when I'm not at a speaking engagement and I'm actually home in the state of Maryland, they are my number one focus and they take priority over everything else. So the reason you and I can schedule this podcast right now is because my kids are in school at the moment and there's nothing I can be doing with them. So this works out perfectly for us. If you had asked me to schedule this at a time where they had a basketball game or it was a night where I'm supposed to take them to dinner, then I would have politely declined, or we would have had to find another time to schedule. So again, I'm not saying that what works for me is going to work for anybody else, but it does work really well at present. And that's kind of how I view balance. Another word that you brought up that has a very different connotation for people is the word grind. I don't use the word grind to describe anything in my life. I don't grind 24/7. In fact, in full transparency, and this might even sound comical, you know what I was doing right before we jumped on this call? I took a 30-minute nap. I actually took a nap because I played basketball at 6 a.m. this morning. I knocked out a bunch of work and did some calls earlier, and I had a little bit of downtime, and I need to recharge my body because my goal is to be able to stay up late enough tonight to watch the Sweet 16 games. And when they have a 10 o'clock start time, that's pretty much past my bedtime. So I literally took a nap before doing this, and I do it with a huge smile. Like, there's no guilt involved. That's part of my self-care routine, and I don't feel the need to work 16-hour days. Now, there have been times in my career where I have logged some serious hours. And if you look over the breadth of my career, like, I've paid my dues and I've put in my hours. So I believe in hard work. And I believe that if you want to be good at anything, you've got to be willing to put in some hard work and put in some hours. But I also don't think that it needs to monopolize everything that you do. And I don't think you need to do it just as a badge of honor. You know, there are days where I work more than others, but there are days where I'll take the entire day off and do absolutely nothing work related. And it's incredibly refreshing and it's invigorating. And then similar to Jokic, which you just mentioned, then I come back even hungrier and more excited to get back to it because I took some time off. And my guess is because he is so committed to the game of basketball for the 9 or 10 months that he's playing for the Nuggets, that it actually does him some good to get away from it for a couple of months when he goes back home. And then when it's time to get back at it, I bet he's as hungry as ever.
I love the term work-life harmony, and I think Jeff Bezos had mentioned it during one of his interviews, and he talked about, obviously the idea, everything that you just laid out, but the idea that if you're doing something that you truly love, that gives you energy,
Yes.
you don't need balance. You're already in balance, right? You don't come home drained and in need of a nap, which, by the way, I'm also a huge fan of afternoon naps. I think they are fantastic. And so it goes back to the idea that we discussed earlier about finding something that you're passionate about, something that you actually enjoy doing, something that gives you energy, that fills your bucket. And I also love the idea of staying present. That's one thing that I struggled with a ton, and I'm still working on.
Me too.
Because I think it's very easy for us to get distracted, especially in today's day and age. But I think if you're truly present in the moment, if I am truly in this podcast right now with you and I'm paying attention to every single word that you say, my brain has no capacity to be drifting off anywhere else, right? There is no anxiety, there is no depression, there is no, other symptoms that may arise because I am here in this moment. And for me, like you talk about guilt as well. I went through a period where it's like, all right, anytime I wasn't working on this podcast, I felt guilty. Like if I sat down to watch a basketball game, I would feel guilty because I was, I would tell myself, what are you doing? Why are you not working on the podcast? You could be doing this, you could be doing that. And so that's very unhealthy as well. So I just really resonate with your ideas around balance and about finding harmony. And about being present, making sure that you fill up those buckets, while you're in that certain environment.
Oh no, I love that you said that. And really, to me, the most important takeaway is that each of us as individuals need to find the right tempo and pace for us and find the right workload. And that will change throughout your life. That will change, in different seasons and for different reasons. I mean, I'm a divorced father of 3 teenage kids who runs his own business, who is 50 years old. All right, those parameters are different than someone you have listening right now that might be 20 years old and fresh out of college. It's different than if you have somebody listening right now that is currently married and has an infant at home. This is different for someone that works for a different, works for a business as opposed to being self-employed. So all of these parameters are different. And, as I listen to hours and hours of podcasts every single week. I try to start every single day with a 60-minute walk. When it's nice out here in the DC area, I go outside to walk. When it's a little chilly, I just walk on the treadmill. But I devour podcasts. And 2 people that I've always really enjoyed and listened to and resonated with are Gary Vaynerchuk and Alex Hormozy. And I like the way they think. I like their ideas. But both of them are happiest and most fulfilled when they're working. Both of them say that they'll work 15, 16, 18-hour days, but it's because they love it. And by no means are they prescribing that for anybody else. I can already tell you that I don't want to work 18 hours a day. So that's okay. But it's also okay that they choose to. We each have to find our rhythm. And to me, because I have experienced the guilt that you just mentioned, the guilt that, well, why am I taking a 30-minute nap when I could be writing a little bit more for my next book, or I could be rehearsing for my next keynote, or I could be making no social, but that list will never end. That treadmill will never turn off. There is always something that I could be doing for my business, but I've learned for me that I want to take the foot off the gas at times to enjoy my life. And as I said, it all goes back to what's the ultimate North Star that you're pursuing. For me, the number one metric is quality of life. And quality of life for me is defined by how much time and energy and presence can I devote to those 4 pillars I mentioned earlier. So for me, I woke up at 4:30 this morning because I play basketball on Tuesday and Thursday mornings from 6 to 7. So I woke up early enough. I got to do some stretches to keep these Achilles warmed up, to eat a healthy breakfast and to hydrate, and to be mentally and physically ready so that when we start playing at 6 a.m., I'm ready to compete. And then after that, I've got another series of workouts that I do. And then I come home and I shower, and then I work in my office for a few hours. I squeeze in a nap. I do a podcast. I'm going to take my sons to their basketball practice tonight, and then I'm going to watch some March Madness. And to me, that is about as awesome of a day as I could ever design. I get to do some things for my self-care that I enjoy doing. I get to be productive and do some work. I get to have an awesome conversation with you. I get to see my sons tonight and take them to practice. And I get to watch basketball, basically on the bookends of my day. That is about as awesome of a day as I could design. And yet throughout that entire day, I'm only working today, 3 or 4 hours total. But that's okay. Now, tomorrow will bring something different. Tomorrow could bring a traditional 8-hour workday. And then Monday, I might choose to just take the entire day off and do some more creative work. So to me, that's what's most important. And, Alex Hormozi and Gary Vaynerchuk could be listening to this and going, oh my gosh, you're playing basketball, you're watching basketball, you're taking naps. I could never do that. And that's okay. They don't need to. They can grind it hard for 15 hours a day because that's their sweet spot and that's what they love. So to me, do not let what others are doing and don't let what's on social media dictate what you should be doing. That needs to come from within. It's like Steve's new book. You got to win that game from within. It's got to come from within, from the inside out, to design the life that you want to live.
I mean, just very well said. I want to bring us to, we talked about this concept of hard work. We were just discussing it. You have a story with Kevin Durant. And actually, I should have done this at the beginning, but here we are. For the audience to truly appreciate kind of the work and the scope of work that you've done, you've worked with NBA players such as KD, Kyrie, Steph, John Wall, LeBron, Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, the list goes on and on, other notable athletes as well. So extensive experience. But you have a story with KD that I'll let you tell, but essentially it's when KD was a little bit younger and you put him through a more difficult workout. What was KD's reaction to that workout, and what did you learn about the mindset that is required for greatness?
Yeah, I met KD when he was 15 years old. So I've known KD for a long time. And that's because we're both products of the DC area here. And yeah, I took him through his first ever strength and conditioning workout and laid the hammer pretty hard on him. I mean, I was excited for an opportunity to work with this young prospect that I knew firsthand was going to be a really exceptional player. And he had never done anything like that before. And in hindsight, I probably threw a little bit too much at him too quickly. And it was a really hard workout for him. And when I asked him after the workout about it, I asked him if he liked it and to give me a piece of humble pie. He said, no, I didn't. But I know this is the kind of stuff I need to do if I want to play in the NBA one day. So, when can I see you again? And I just remembered at that moment, realizing that this young man had the maturity at his very young age to understand that sometimes you got to do some things that you don't necessarily want to do in order to have the things that you really want to have, and that you've got to be willing to make some sacrifices. And in this case, the sacrifice would be some physical and mental discomfort, to say the least, pretty consistently in order to build his body up to a point that he could play the game that he loves so much. I mean, I don't know that I've ever met anyone that loves to play basketball as much as Kevin Durant. I mean, I've always asserted that if you took away his contract and his millions of dollars and you took him out of the league and you just dropped him off somewhere, he'd be out at a outdoor court shooting hoops within about 10 minutes because he just loves to play the game of basketball. And I'm sure he also appreciates the things that basketball affords him to do now because he does it at such a high level. But he is an absolute basketball purist. He doesn't play basketball because it offers fame and money. He just happens to have fame and money as a byproduct of doing something he loves and he's really good at. But yeah, that was that story just always reminds me that, you know, you've got to be willing to make some sacrifices and pay some dues and put in some work. And I sure hope that with everything I was describing before, that I'm not saying that I don't do those things anymore or that those things are beneath me or they don't apply to me. I still have an incredible work ethic. And when I put my focus on something and I decide to put my work in, you know, I'll put my work ethic against anybody else's. I just don't choose to have that switch on 24/7. I believe in having off days. I believe in taking vacations. I believe in unplugging. I mean, I believe in taking naps. So to me, I'm not saying that I think I'm going to ever, you know, like to me, one of the most rewarding things we can do in the world is to give something a great effort, is to make a sacrifice and work really hard. And I'm even doing that now as I'm training for this K Academy this summer. Like I'm training as if this is an NBA, you know, open audition coming up and it's a bunch of old men that just want to go play basketball for a few days. But I'm taking it very serious because I want to go there and make a great first impression and prove to myself that when I trust the process, I make the commitment to train properly and consistently, that I can show up to something as the best version of myself. And to me, there's a lot of satisfaction and a lot of fun involved in doing that. But hard work is incredibly rewarding, is very satisfying, and is very fulfilling. So I sure hope nothing I said before makes it sound like I don't believe in hard work. That will always be the pillar of everything that it is that we want.
What's your perspective on uncertainty, and how have you seen athletes transition through a period of uncertainty? Because I think for a lot of people, uncertainty brings fear, you know, can bring other stuff. You know, certain people just like to be in control all the time. And I'm sure athletes experience a certain level of, you know, maybe fear around, you know, hey, you know, what may happen tomorrow? Am I going to get traded, or am I going to perform at the level that I want to perform? So how have you seen uncertainty creep into their lives and their performance?
Well, for me personally, the one of the most helpful mind shifts that I've ever had is learning to accept that life is uncertain by nature. I mean, what I found very interesting, especially when the pandemic first hit in you know, early 2020, was a word that was thrown around a lot. Was things are uncertain, the future is uncertain, and for whatever reason, it finally just hit me. Yet life has always been uncertain. The future has always been uncertain. This is nothing new because of a pandemic. Now, we as human beings tend to get lulled into a false sense of security and a false sense of certainty, and we think we can predict tomorrow. And then something like a pandemic happens, and we're reminded that we can't. But life is always uncertain. You know, right now, as you and I are recording this, neither you or I can predict with 100% accuracy what's going to happen even 10 minutes from now, much less tomorrow or the month after. So for me, a general surrender and acceptance to the fact that life by nature is uncertain, and I have to be at peace with that. I in ways that I can, I guess, help combat what would normally cause some potential anxiety or some worry or some stress, is just acknowledging that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm okay with that. You know, that there are certain things that I can do in preparation. There's certain ways I can behave, as you just mentioned perfectly before, being in the present moment. Like, generally speaking, depression and anxiety and worry and stress usually come because we're looking backwards towards the past, or we're trying to look forwards and predict the future. there's very little discomfort ever in the actual present moment. And I'm talking more of mental and emotional discomfort. Obviously you could, smack your hand with a hammer, and that's going to be very uncomfortable in the present moment. But I'm talking about our relationship with things in the past, or our perception of what things will be in the future, is what causes most of our mental and emotional anguish. If you can learn to just be, if you can learn to just accept the present moment, whatever it may bring, and just know that no matter what happens, I will be okay, and that I am okay with whatever is going to happen, to me is a tremendous weight lifted off myself mentally and emotionally. And what the definition of stress that I most resonate with, I first heard from Eckhart Tolle, who's kind of a modern day philosopher. And Eckhart said that stress is no more than the desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment, which means we only feel stress when we wish things were different than they were, which means we're fighting against reality. We're fighting against what is. And that's a fight you'll only lose 100% of the time. So I'm trying really hard at present, at this age in my life, to not fight reality. I recognize that there's lots of things that go on in this world that are not my preference, that I'd like to see the world unfold differently, but it hasn't. So I have to learn how to accept it. And to me, that has just been this is without question the least amount of stress, the least amount of anxiety, and the least amount of depression I've ever had at any point in my life. And it's all because of a level of surrender and a level of acceptance to just allowing what is. And with that said, there are plenty of things that happen in my life that are not my preference. There are plenty of things that happen that I wish would unfold a different way, but I don't continue to fight against the reality. I just accept this is what happens. This is the circumstance, or this is the event, or this is what that person said or did. I may not like it, but that's what happened. So now it's up to me to respond. And really, once we understand that we don't control the outer world, but we always control our response, is a very empowering mindset. So for me, I put most of my energy, time, love, heart, soul, focus, and attention into having thoughtful responses, whether what happens in the world is to my preference or not.
So what would be like your first piece of advice for someone who's listening to this right now and they're like, wow, being in the present could really solve a lot of my problems, but they don't necessarily know how to start, or they're not familiar with maybe what it takes to really live in the present. What would be your advice to that person?
Well, the most important part is just having a level of awareness. Awareness is always the first step to improving anything. And that's because you'll never improve something you're unaware of, and you'll never fix something you're oblivious to. So the first step is to be able to check in with yourself throughout the day, almost a little quick recalibration, and try to catch yourself when you're not being present. And for the overwhelming majority of people, that will probably be an overwhelming majority part of your day, that you are spending so much of your day thinking back to the past of something that happened 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, 5 days ago, or you're sitting and stewing and worrying and stressing about something that may happen in the future, 5 minutes from now, 5 hours from now, 5 days from now. So the key is learning how to be present. And a lot of it has to do with our self-talk, the dialogue we have with ourselves. And that's where we need to try to constantly remind ourselves. And maybe you do it a couple dozen times a day, is to just make sure you're being present. Like you said before, right now, you and I have both made the commitment to be fully present during this conversation. Now, part of that, at least on my end, is setting up in an environment that allows me, or I guess encourages me to be more present. So I don't have any other tabs on my laptop open. My phone is in the other room. I don't have the TV on. I'm not folding laundry. I'm not doing anything right now. In fact, the only thing I can be doing is talking to you. So I've intentionally set my environment up to not tempt me to look at my phone or look at something. So that, to me, environment is incredibly important. But is just check in with yourself. Even if it's just an hour a day, every hour on the hour, just check in and saying, am I choosing to place my attention in what I believe is most deserving of it in this moment? Am I choosing to align my time and my energy and my focus to what I want to be focused on right now, or is my mind elsewhere? And with that, I would encourage anyone that does that to be very patient with yourself, to give yourself some grace. You mentioned earlier in this conversation that being present is something that's still challenging for you. Oh, it is still very, very challenging for me. And I've been on this journey for a few years now. It's still arguably my biggest challenge. So I'm far from the status of a Tibetan monk. I still catch myself thinking about something in the past or thinking about something in the future. I just now have a level of awareness that when I find myself straddling in either of those positions, I can cue myself to get back to the present moment. And for me, the terminology I use is be where your feet are. Wherever your feet are, wherever your physical body is, make sure that's where your head and your heart are as well. So I probably say there's two phrases I say to myself dozens of times a day. And I say it internally. I'm not walking around like talking to myself. I say, be where your feet are. And I remind myself that if I'm not being present. So if I'm with my kids, but I'm focused on what's on my phone, I'm not really present with my kids, and I catch myself, all right, Alan, put the phone down, be where your feet are, be where your feet are. That's one phrase I say all the time. And the other phrase I say all the time is next play, next play. No matter what just happened, I'm always going to refocus the lens on the next play. I'm not going to get caught up in what just happened. I'm going to keep dialing in on what's right in front of me. And that helps keep me present.
Alan, in your work with athletes, I'm curious, what have you seen to be the most challenging mental obstacle for most athletes, and how that maybe has evolved over the years? Because you've been at this for a while, and I imagine with social media and everything else that maybe the most challenging mental obstacle has evolved throughout the years. So curious, kind of, again, what's the most challenging one, and then if that's evolved at all, over the past decade.
I actually think the most challenging one is what we're talking about right now, is the ability. Now, the terminology we use in sport would be you need to play present, which basically means you need to focus on what's right in front of you right now. Don't worry about the missed shot or the turnover or the referee's blown call a couple possessions ago. That's over. It's in the past. It's in the rearview mirror. It is unchangeable. So stop thinking about it. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to win or lose the game 20 minutes from now, or what's going to happen in the next quarter, or what will happen if you miss this free throw. Don't worry about that. That's in the future. Just focus on the possession that's right in front of you. Focus on executing your skills in your role for your team right now. And the more of a game that you can stay in that zone of being fully present and playing present, the better off you'll be, the higher you'll perform. But that is without question the hardest. It was the hardest for me when I was an athlete. It was the hardest for me when I was coaching athletes, and it's still the hardest for me today, is locking into that present moment. But the more time you can spend in the present, the better. And now keep in mind too, especially with sport, there is a time and a place to look back, to watch film, and to look back at a previous game and unpack some of the decisions you made so you can learn from it. So I'm not saying that we never want to look back. And at the same time, it's incredibly important that you practice and you work out and you prepare scouting reports, film sessions to prepare for the next game, which of course is future based. So there's absolutely a time and a place to look back and to look forward. But during the actual game, during competition, is not the time to do either of those. That's when you need to be as dialed into the present moment as you can. And yeah, I think that has always been and will always be the toughest challenge for athletes, or for anyone for that matter.
I as many people are, a huge fan of Kobe Bryant, and it's just so sad that he was taken away from us as quickly as he was. Because I think post basketball he was gearing up to do something real special in the storytelling sphere, and you already saw that with the accomplishments that he had before he passed away. But when I study people like Kobe Bryant or even Michael Jordan, I'm always reminded of this unwavering level of confidence that they had. And seemingly in any moment, given any scenario, they were just going to be confident. And confidence is one of those, perhaps maybe a buzzword that people throw around, and they say, hey, this person's really confident, or you just need to be more confident. Your solution is just be more confident. From your work, is confidence something that can truly be trained, like strength? Or is it something that is inherent, and some people are just born with it, and some people are naturally predisposed to it? Like, how do you view confidence?
Well, on a general spectrum, I do think being elite in almost anything always helps to have some predispositions, to have some DNA in your favor, to have some upbringing where these things were modeled at a very young age. But no, confidence is absolutely something that not only needs to be trained, it needs to be earned. And to tell someone to be confident is about as helpful as telling someone when they're angry, hey, just calm down. Like, when in the history of the world has telling someone to calm down ever helped? It doesn't. In fact, it only infuriates them. So telling someone just be more confident will probably make them less confident, because now they'll feel shamed and guilt and frustrated that they can't just snap their fingers and possess this elusive trait. It has been my firsthand experience, as well as the experience of working with a variety of high performers, that confidence comes from a few different areas. And this is how we can earn confidence, and this is how we can train confidence. Number one, and these aren't necessarily in order, but number one, it comes from demonstrated performance. Confidence comes from competence, and competence comes from seeing yourself do the thing that's going to give you confidence. The reason somebody like Stephen Curry is such a confident shooter is because he has made more shots during the unseen hours in empty gyms than probably half of the NBA combined. He has put in the effort and the reps during the unseen hours to earn the right to be confident. He has seen the ball go through the basket from him shooting it millions and millions of times at this point in his career, so he has earned that confidence. So some of where we develop our confidence is by putting ourselves in position where we can taste some success, putting ourselves in position where we can do some things and see ourselves be successful. It's why when you're learning to shoot a basketball, you learn shooting the ball 2 feet from the basket, not 20 feet from the basket. You start in close and you develop the form and the muscle, the footwork and the muscle memory, and you see the ball go through the basket. And then you slowly start to move away from the basket. That's the reason that we, would teach the game of basketball that way, or at least the skill of shooting. So demonstrated performance is one. Another area that confidence comes from is keeping the promises we make to ourselves. If I tell myself tomorrow morning I'm going to get up at 4:30 a.m. and go play basketball, if I do get up at 4:30 a.m. and I go play basketball, I start to strengthen that confidence muscle and belief. If I wake up in the morning and hit the snooze and pull the covers over my head and go, man, 4:30 is way too early. I'm too tired. I don't feel like playing. Well, now I'm going to start to erode my confidence because I'm not able to keep the promise that I set to myself. So the reason I share that is be very careful with the promises you make to yourself. Don't start small. Start with small promises and small goals and slowly work your way up the same way you'd work your way back from shooting the ball very close to the rim. Confidence also comes from our self-talk and our dialogue. That inner voice. How do we choose to talk to ourselves? Do we talk to ourselves in a very demeaning and critical way? Well, if you do, you're going to erode your confidence. Or do you talk to yourself in an empowering way, in a challenging way? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be soft with yourself. You can still hold yourself to an unbelievably, high standard of excellence. And I would encourage that you do that. But it means that you talk to yourself with some compassion. You talk to yourself with some love. You talk to yourself the same way that you would talk to someone else that you care about. And learning to do that, again, will strengthen your confidence. And if you start to mix those three things together consistently, you put yourselves in positions where you can see competence and you can see yourself demonstrating performance. When you do mess up, you talk to yourself in a stern but a compassionate and loving way. You keep the promises you make to yourself. When you say you're going to be somewhere and you're going to do something, you do that and you honor that. If you start to do those things, then confidence will start to grow. And then, like winning, confidence begets more confident. The more you start to do those things, then the more you start to self-identify as a confident person. But also understand too that confidence is somewhat compartmentalized. There are certain areas of my life that I am unbelievably confident, but that's because of the recipe I just gave you. There are other areas where I'm not as confident because I haven't earned the right to be. If you could put me on any stage in the world right now and ask me to give a keynote on leadership and performance, and I could do that with the best of them because my confidence is incredibly high. if you put me in, any arena or stadium and asked me to sing the national anthem before the game started, I would be absolutely petrified because I don't have very much confidence in my singing voice because I haven't put in the work to deserve that. So, it's okay for confidence to be somewhat compartmentalized. That's why someone can be one of the most confident players to ever play the game, but then if you ask them to give a speech in front of a group, that might make them a little nervous. They might not be as confident in their speaking ability as they are in their playing ability. So it's okay for it to have some compartmentalization.
Love it. Alan, I know you have to run. I have one last question for you.
Sure thing. Man. This was so much fun, by the way. You asked great questions. I love it.
No, this has been a joy. I've learned so much. I really hope the audience I know that they will get the value out of this. When we try to think ahead, let's say 15, 20 years from now, what do you think people are going to look back on and say, wow, they really got that wrong about high performance or about mindset or about any of the topics that we covered today? Like, is there something right now that you think we're just doing completely wrong?
It's such an insightful question, and I can go in two different directions on that. On one hand, I don't know that I can predict that, because if I could predict what I thought the answer would be 15 years from now, then I'd be making those changes in the present, because that's really the number one filter I use for the decisions I make in my life today, is they have to be in alignment with the man I'm trying to be tomorrow. And when I say tomorrow, I say that in air quotes. I say that, I'm almost 50 years old, but I'm crystal clear on who I want the 70-year-old Alan to be. So 20 years from now, I want Alan Stein Jr. to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want him to have a strong, deep relationship with his kids and his family and friends. I want the 70-year-old Alan at that time to be doing work he considers meaningful and in service of other people. So right now, every decision I make in my life, I try to make it in alignment with becoming that person. So that in 20 years from now, when I am 70, I will have designed that future, and the beautiful part is I get to reap those benefits right now in the present moment, because I'm making those decisions in the present moment. So I can say with a huge smile that right now at 50 years old, I am physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I do have a wonderful relationship with my kids, family, and friends, and I am currently doing work that I consider meaningful and in service of other people. So now I just have to keep planting those seeds and laying those bricks to ensure that that's what I'll be at 70. But I think overall, if I had to pick one thing to answer your question, because I didn't want to dodge it, is we will continue to refine the fact that more is not better. Better is better. And that it's not, and we talked about this at length earlier, it's not just about logging more hours and doing more work. It's about doing a higher quality of work. I do think over time, quality will continue to be more important than quantity in just about every area of our life, including everything under the umbrella of high performance.
What a beautiful way to end this podcast. Alan Stein Jr., thank you so much for your time, man. This has been fantastic. We'll put all your social media links down below, all the links to your fantastic books. I can't thank you enough. This has been a true pleasure.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad we finally connected. If this does resonate with your audience and they feel they got some value out of it, I'd be happy to come on again if you ever wanted to do a part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll definitely take you up on that, because I personally want to do a part 2. So I think
we'll
it'll be a lot of fun.
Even if we don't record it, we'll just do it, because I get a lot of value out of this too, man. But this was a lot of fun. You do a terrific job, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Until next time.